So whichever way you kind of cut it, by the middle of the century we're going to need approximately 70 to 100% more food worldwide, whilst at the same time facing inevitable yield reductions due to climate change. Hopefully a move towards low input agriculture as we move to a low carbon world. And also there is the potential of a loss of agricultural land due to biofuel production. So we have a very big nut to crack in terms of actually producing more food. So can we do it whilst we protect our environment? I think the answer is yes, but there probably isn't any black and white. We can't protect our natural environment by farming less intensively, simply because the lower yields that come from farming less intensively mean that we would need far more land to produce the amount of food that we require. And that land, frankly, just isn't available worldwide. There are bits of land, clearly, we can increase our footprint, but we can't double our footprint to produce double the amount of food. So we have to have some elements of increased application of technology to use the land where we can use the land to increase production. And that's not just intensive agriculture being evil. It is greening agriculture. And if we're moving towards a low input, low carbon economy, then agriculture has to green anyway. And there's a poster over there which is about conservation tillage. There are ways of doing agriculture in a way that is environmentally friendly and high yielding, and so we need to do that. And clearly there are a role for new technologies as well. I'm a conservationist by nature, and I can see a benefit, for example, genetically modified organisms. So crop biotechnology can play a role if it allows an increase in yield, because it would mean that we need less land to produce food. And me as a conservationist, I'm worried greatly about the agricultural footprint expanding and taking good land out of nature conservation or destroying biodiversity. So what do we need to do? I think there are just three things that I think we need to recognise to help us with this. Firstly, as Howard says, we need to recognise that biodiversity is key. It is key in the services that it provides, so-called ecosystem services, whether they be pollination, which increases crop yields, natural enemy services, so this is small wasps and things that kill aphids. The more natural enemy services that we have, the less pesticides we need to use, or the less yields go down. Soil fertility, all of these things, biodiversity of its nature helps us provide, and if we can maximise the ecosystem service, then that helps increase yields. It could well be that at the landscape level, you get much more of both by farming for food in one place, and then farming for biodiversity in another place, rather than farming extensively, like organic farming, where you're trying to raise food and biodiversity in the same place. What we do in Europe, or what we do in the UK, or anywhere, impacts on what happens in the rest of the world. So, for example, if Europe goes organic, we will still continue to demand the same amount of food. We will produce less locally, and we'll have to import more. So the costs and benefits of farming sustainably in one place might be levied somewhere else in the world.
The first half of the 21st century, we can expect the global demand for food to double, and we can try to meet these rapidly growing food needs by either producing more on the land that already is being farmed, or by expanding the acreage. And the second option, namely expanding the acreage, isn't really available because around the globe the reserves in land that are available for food production are limited. The best land already is being farmed. So the reserves in land that we have that are of some significance often are very important areas ecologically, such as the tropical rainforest. So the only option we really have to significantly increase the global supply of food is to produce more on the acreage already being farmed. And of course, we have a problem if no decisive action is taken. Our own estimates suggest that the price of key agricultural commodities likely will be 50 to 100% higher towards the end of the decade than they were at the beginning of the last decade. And if our numbers are only halfway correct, then we can see a significant increase, or a dramatic increase, I should better say, in the number of hungry and malnourished around the world. Already today we have around 1 billion humans who don't have enough to eat. Already today we have 16,000 children who die every day as a consequence of malnutrition. So an increasing price of agricultural commodities will increase hunger and malnutrition around the world, but it also significantly increases the incentives for the poor who live in poor countries in the countryside to go out in the woods, burn the woods in an attempt to claim additional agricultural land so they can feed themselves and their families. But already today, this type of agricultural land use change contributes more to global warming than global manufacturing. It contributes more to global warming than global transportation.
Already we are a food deficient continent at the moment. And so when we talk of feeding the world in 2050, it's already a challenge at the moment. And one of the ones which we should look at is access to improved varieties as well as affordable inputs to support the agriculture component. The other one is some planned subsidies. I think this is an issue, but if we take an example of Malawi, 2 to 3 years ago, they embarked on that road, and a country which was having food deficiency is now having a surplus, not for itself, but also for other regional markets. To ensure that the farmers have access to improved seed varieties at affordable prices, because we are dealing with resource-poor farmers who cannot afford the technologies as it is at the moment. The other one is we have the challenge at the moment. We are going through either prolonged droughts, which are usually followed by short-lived floods. What can we do to harness that water in form of, to convert that water for irrigation, to prolong a life of a crop so that we can be able to harvest? Livestock use. Many times when we go through a drought, especially currently, we end up losing a lot of the livestock. And even for domestic use in areas where water is still a challenge. Farmers should still, in one way or another, the small-scale farmers, still they are the custodians of crop biodiversity. I think we should not lose that fact. Our scientific institutions don't have the capacity to maintain this germplasm. And when we have any missions, collection missions, we still fall to the farmers. And we have to find a way on how we can still maintain this crop biodiversity. As you are all aware, to develop a new variety, for whatever reason, you still have to fall back to that diversity which the farmers have been maintaining.
I think the message from the three panelists is already clear. We clearly have to produce a lot more with a lot less, both in terms of land and as well as other inputs. I'd like to focus my opening remarks on a broader set of issues, actually, which is how can we make sure that the environmental consequences of farming actions are better internalized in the decisions farmers make. I think one of the key challenges we have right now is that a lot of the environmental implications of farming choices are economically invisible. There is no price to the environmental harm that might be inadvertently caused, and there might be no rewards to the environmental benefits from farming practices should they yield such benefits. And I think that's a fundamental issue which needs to be pushed harder, I think, if we are to move towards environmental sustainability of agriculture. So there needs to be a better signal, economic signal, I would say, in terms of use of scarce resources like water and energy in farming. At the same time, there need to be incentives for farmers to conserve biodiversity or other ecosystem services. And we need to have schemes like payments for ecosystem services, which provide those kinds of incentives. And the final point I'd like to make is that when we talk about environment writ large, I mean, it's certainly a lot more than biodiversity, but it's also a lot more than pollution or resource degradation. We also need to look at the consequences of global environmental change, in particular climate change, on agriculture and food production, and also to what extent agriculture could be part of the solution in both adapting to the impacts of climate change as well as helping mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you.